I'd like to shift gears a little bit now and spend some time talking about what I think is going to be one of the most emotional points in our leading up to retirement, which is when we actually think about pulling the trigger. We're now getting ready to retire. We have to make that decision. We've probably had this one age in our mind our whole lifetime, but now we're there, and I think a lot of people have anxiety at this point in time because they're just not sure what they're going to experience. And I think part of the reason for that is because for the first time in our lives, we're going to need to generate our own paycheck. We've been used to living off the employer, but now we need to figure out how to make this all work and make it sustainable for what could be a very long period of time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about retirement income. And Nathan, you've talked about this idea of people in retirement to spend responsibly, potentially compartmentalizing their assets based on their expenses. Looks like we have up here a flow chart of piggy banks. Can you walk us through this model?
Sure, Mike. So when we're before retirement, we get our salary every month. We have a bunch of mental accounts. We say, well, this is my rent money. This is my entertainment money. This is money for this, for that. I'm saving for a vacation, for whatever else I might be saving for. And so we label our money immediately into different buckets. You can do the same thing in retirement. Even if you don't have a pension plan, even if you're living off your own 401k or IRAs, you have this lump sum, you decide using a 4% rule that I know Farnoosh has talked about or others have talked about, you set some income. Once you have that income, you can allocate it just like you would your usual retirement account, your usual income. You can say, look, some of this income is going to be for vacations, some of this income is going to be for rent, some of this income is going to be for all the necessities that I have, and that will make you manage that just like you would manage your income. And so it doesn't have to be this scary change. You can apply all the same tools, all the same kinds of mental accounts that you did before. Interestingly, just to touch back again on savings quickly with this, one of the reasons this might be useful is also when you're saving to imagine I'm saving a little bit more because I want to travel when I retire. I'm saving a little more because I need to meet my rent payment. Having compartments that you're saving towards can also help you to save more because those compartments are smaller and more manageable than I need, some seven-figure number that someone is scared to put on the screen. Instead thinking, I want to save a little more because it'll be fun to go to Asia. I've never been there. When I'm going to retire, I really want to do that. So let me have a little fund for that and sort of put money into that. And so if you can even compartmentalize on the saving and then on the pulling out to say, that was my travel money, now you pull it out as travel money, you can just live life as you normally did. And it doesn't have to be the big scary thing of, here's this lump sum, I don't know how to allocate it. If you treat it much like you treat income with your buckets that you're used to having, I think you'll have a much easier time when pulling money out of a retirement account.
I think that makes a lot of sense because if I look at this one account that I have as this big pot of money, I might spend indiscriminately. Farnoosh, Nathan touched on this a little bit, but I know that when advisors typically consult with clients that are transitioning into retirement, there are a number of different withdrawal methodologies that they might employ. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the different ideas that people have used successfully?
So the biggest idea, I think, is the 4% withdrawal rate, which is that, all along we've been telling people to save 10% a year annually, assuming that they'll need about 85% of their income once they're in retirement to maintain their lifestyle. Imagining that you don't have your mortgage anymore, you've sort of eliminated some other costs. And so to live in the next 25, 30 years comfortably at that 85% lifestyle rate, 4% withdrawal from your retirement. I know that's a lot of numbers to throw out, but 4% is like the number we hear about a lot. But I think that you also want to take into consideration that a lot of people aren't retiring right away at 65. If your vision of retirement is actually continuing to work a little bit, which I think is a reality many pre-retirees are facing, that, they may not be working 40 hours a week, but they want to do something. We're living longer, we're healthy, we might need the money. So factor that in as well. If you're continuing to work in retirement and you can live off of that income, you may not need to withdraw from your 401k or IRA. Keep in mind that you have to eventually at age 70 and a half, but starting at 59 and a half is not when you absolutely have to start withdrawing. You can wait if you don't need the money, and I would actually encourage people to be conservative in the beginning because your costs are likely to be it's a big unknown, right? I don't know what my costs are going to be entirely in retirement, but I can guess that healthcare is going to be a big component. And the older you get, that might become more and more imminent and more stressful. Is how do I pay for all of the different costs that are now related to my health? Medicare and Medicaid are helpful, but it's not everything. So a lot of out-of-pocket costs you should anticipate in retirement. So having sort of a conservative start to your withdrawal strategy in retirement is smart. People delaying Social Security, for example, for as long as they can to be able to not only live off their current means, but then of course the longer you wait to collect Social Security, the more you can receive. And so that for me would be, given the circumstances now, people are living longer, looking to work in retirement, there's a lot of unexpected wild card expenses in retirement. Don't be so aggressive with the withdrawal in the early sort of 5 to 10 years of retirement.
And so I want to stay right there because our next graphic that I'm going to put up actually specifically deals with Social Security. And I want to touch on this before we get to our audience Q&A. I think, part of what you're talking about, the decision on how to take income from our portfolio, is going to in part be based on how much we can expect from predictable resources like Social Security, a pension if you're lucky enough to have one. But this specific decision of Social Security is a very challenging one. The fact of today is that most people are collecting it as soon as they can get it. I've put up on the screen a slide. I just wanted to break this down quickly for our audience and then ask you a couple of follow-up questions. So this graph shows the break-even points, at which ages you'll cross over for collecting more benefits based on whether you take Social Security earlier or take it a little bit later. So in this example, we have someone who's 66 and that's their full retirement age. That would be the age at which they're collecting 100% of their benefit. Now for anyone, it could be 67 or 65, depending on when you were born, but in this example, we used 66. And if you look here, you'll see that if someone were to begin collecting at 66 versus 62, the break-even age is 78 as to when they will then start collecting more total in benefits from Social Security than had they started collecting early. So my first question to you is, what are some of the considerations people should be thinking of besides just wanting to retire earlier? You mentioned withdrawals of a certain percentage, but we have to take into account inflation. I would think low interest rates as well as longevity. What are some of the things that people need to?
All of the above, yeah. Longevity, higher interest rates. At the same time, though, you might have some diminished costs. You might not have a mortgage. You might not have, you're not taking care of your kids anymore, potentially. But I think the biggest wild card in retirement is healthcare, is the healthcare component. And so having a cushion for that, an emergency fund for that. You don't know how often I hear from, just anecdotally, friends and older friends saying, my father's Alzheimer's care is $8,000 a month. And that's out of pocket. A lot of times that falls on the burden of their kids if the parents don't have that kind of savings. So I feel as though if you are in your 60s and healthy and you are able to still work, do that and take advantage of your health and take advantage of your energy levels to really kind of keep status quo for as long as you can, and to delay your collection of Social Security to the latest that you can, ideally, because the older you get, presumably the more you might want to have saved for what I think is the biggest wild card is healthcare.
Healthcare is a pretty big one.
Yeah.
Nathan, if I'm looking at this example and I'm 62 and I'm saying, well, I've got 16 years before I would have been better off waiting to 66 to start collecting Social Security. Is that going to be a problem for some folks? How do we overcome that? I think Farnoosh touched on a lot of this.
I think these are good points, and I'd add to them the one that we touched on earlier, which is when something's not right in front of you and it's not going to happen today, we discount it, we don't think as much about it. And so when you're thinking about, well, I'll be ahead when I'm 82, and versus giving up some money today in my pocket, people say, well, I'm going to take the money now, especially with fears running wild about, when is Social Security going to be cut? We know lots of things are happening around Social Security, and what we do know for sure is we don't know what's going to happen to Social Security. And so it's a lot of uncertainty, and so it's a lot of fear. I think, a reasonable prediction, and I'm no political prognosticator, is right now Social Security isn't changing. Okay, and because it's not changing right now, we have to sort of go with our best guess. And the best guess for people in retirement and near retirement is Social Security is going to look roughly like it does now for at least a little while, which means let's assume that that's the case, and then let's make some decisions based on that idea. And the graph clearly shows that most people will be much better off if they delay taking it and if they don't give in to their myopic impulse to have it now. To add to what Farnoosh said about this transition, one way to transition for people who are lucky enough to do it is not to transition from 40 to 0 hours at once, but to see if they can go part-time or they can transition slowly. That not only is a good idea financially, but it's actually a wonderful idea psychologically, because suddenly one day you wake up and you don't have to go to work. you don't even know what to do with yourself sometimes. If you can have a day off a week at the beginning and say, okay, what am I going to do with my day off? And you figure out and you fill that up, and then a year later you have 2 days off or something like that, and you have this phased thing, you will actually come to enjoy that time more. You won't have adapted to it. If you get the whole week off at once, you're going to be adapted to that after a few months and say, oh, this is what my life is like now, and it's not going to feel wonderful. If you're phased where you're slowly getting more free time and more free time, you're going to enjoy that even more. There's lots of studies on adaptation that show if you can take something that's good and give it to yourself bit by bit instead of all at once in a huge lump, you're going to enjoy it a lot more. And so what people want out of retirement is some enjoyment of this relaxation or this free time to do other things. If they can do that in a phased way, that's very important. It also takes care of one problem people have in retirement, which is this feeling of kind of idleness, of I'm not sure what to do with myself. Work gives people a sense of meaning. Work isn't always a bad word when you can do it on your terms. And if you start to phase retirement, instead of doing work because you have to, you're doing the amount of work that you want, which might be 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be zero or all. And I think that's a really important thing. Not everybody has that choice. And it may not be your original job that you do the part-time work at, but if there's something you can do, I think that's a really important way. It can also help you put off the Social Security benefit, which gives you obviously a lot of money down the road.
Farnoosh, one last quick question to dovetail off of this before we go to our audience. You make some great points about transitioning into retirement. There may be some people saying, I had to retire at 62 for one reason or another. I was no longer able to keep my job. Today, we're seeing more advice and there's more guidance out there about how people can prepare for this transition. There are more senior websites, job websites. There are things like that. Any advice you can give someone who's transitioning to make sure that they're ready if they do want to continue working part-time?
Network your way to your transition. My father's in this situation right now. He is in his early 60s looking ahead, and he has a PhD. He's got 30 years of managerial experience. I'm like, Dad, you can teach, you can consult, but you can't just do it overnight. You have to start planting the seeds today, and I think that is relevant for a lot of people in their 60s. They're highly educated, highly skilled, and experienced. So what you really should do now is start to establish those relationships in these other potential industries. If you're going from corporate America to then teaching, you want to start maybe meeting some people at the local universities, maybe brushing up on some skills, brushing up your resume, and of course, like you mentioned, there are websites out there that can help people with the transition, but it's not going to be this overnight thing where you're not working one day and then you're transitioning to your next dream job the next day. You want to start thinking ahead, and it's not uncommon to see a lot of pre-retirees starting their own businesses, taking their skill set, the investment, the savings that they have, and putting it into, say, a small consultancy or a tutoring business or what have you. And a lot of people look at retirement as refirement. It's this new exciting chapter as opposed to, I don't want to say it, but a sadder thing.
Right, absolutely. We want to keep it positive.
Keep it upbeat.